Ever wondered what it was like to be a woman in the Middle Ages? Can you imagine being judged on your every move, word, and even thought? Did you know medieval women lived under a crushing weight of moral expectations that dictated their entire existence? Number 12. Absolute obedience. Could you handle being expected to obey without question? In medieval times, a woman's first and most important virtue was obedience. This wasn't just about following orders. It was a fundamental belief that women needed guidance and control from men. Women in medieval society were expected to obey their fathers before marriage and their husbands afterward. This wasn't optional or negotiable. Religious texts, legal codes, and social customs all reinforced the idea that women were naturally subordinate and needed to submit to male authority. The 13th century text, the Ménagier de Paris, written by a husband to his young wife, laid out extensive instructions on proper wifely behavior. It stressed that a good wife should be very humble and very obedient to her husband. Disobedience wasn't just frowned upon. It could potentially lead to physical punishment, as husbands had legal rights to correct their wives. This obedience extended beyond just following orders. Women were expected to anticipate their husbands' needs, adjust their own behaviors to please them, and never contradict them in public. The ideal wife was one who internalized her husband's wishes so completely that she seemed to have no will of her own. Yet, despite these harsh expectations, many women found subtle ways to exercise agency within these constraints. Letters and court records from the period show women who negotiated, persuaded, and sometimes even manipulated the system to their advantage, all while maintaining the appearance of proper obedience. Number 11. Perfect chastity. What would you do if your entire worth was tied to what you did or didn't do with your body? For medieval women, chastity wasn't just a virtue. It was potentially their most valuable possession. A woman's sexual purity determined her social standing, marriage prospects, and even her family's honor. Unmarried women were expected to remain virgins, wives were expected to be faithful, and widows were often expected to remain celibate. This obsession with female chastity wasn't just a social preference. It was enforced through law, religion, and sometimes violence. The fear of female sexuality ran so deep that entire systems developed to control it. Young unmarried women were closely supervised, with some noble families employing chaperones to watch their daughters continuously. In some regions, women were rarely allowed to be alone, especially with men outside their immediate family. The Madonna, the Virgin Mary, was held up as the ideal female figure, a woman who gave birth while maintaining her virginity. This impossible standard created a paradox for medieval women. They were expected to be both mothers and maintain an aura of sexual purity. Punishment for perceived sexual misconduct could be severe. Women caught in adultery might face public humiliation, physical punishment, divorce without financial support, or in extreme cases even death. The double standard was stark. Men's sexual transgressions were often overlooked or treated as minor offenses, while women's were deemed catastrophic moral failings. Medieval literature reinforced these ideas with stories of women whose valor came from defending their chastity to the death. Saint Agnes, a popular medieval saint, chose execution rather than marriage or sexual violation, a story repeated to young girls as an example to follow. Number 10. Silent modesty. Can you imagine being told your voice itself was dangerous? Medieval women were expected to embrace silence as a virtue and speak only when necessary. Their words were considered potentially disruptive, seductive, or evidence of dangerous independence. The 14th century. Book of the Knight of the Tower, written to instruct young noblewomen, warned, "A woman should speak little, for it is said that much speaking in a woman is a sign of little wisdom." This wasn't just advice. It was a fundamental moral expectation that shaped how women were perceived and treated. Modesty in speech meant not just speaking infrequently, but also controlling the tone, volume, and content of what was said. A proper medieval woman spoke softly, avoided controversial topics, never interrupted men, and certainly never made ribald jokes or used coarse language. Church teachings reinforced these expectations. Preachers frequently cited St. Paul's instructions that women should learn in silence with all subjection and not usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. Religious authorities interpreted these passages as divine confirmation that female silence was both natural and necessary. Women who spoke too much or too boldly risked being labeled as shrews, gossips, or even suspected of witchcraft. The medieval fear of the female voice was so profound that excessive talking by women was sometimes considered a form of sexual impropriety, as if an open mouth symbolized other forms of openness. Yet historical records show many medieval women who managed to speak and be heard despite these restrictions. Female mystics like Hildegard of Bingen claimed divine authority for their words. Christine de Pizan wrote boldly about women's capabilities. Ordinary women testified in courts, ran businesses, and found ways to make their voices count in a society that preferred them silent. Number 9. Domestic excellence. How would you feel if your entire identity was tied to your housekeeping skills? For medieval women, domestic excellence wasn't just about keeping a nice home, it was a moral obligation that defined their worth. A woman was expected to run her household with perfect efficiency, no matter its size. For peasant women, this meant backbreaking labor from dawn until dusk, cooking, cleaning, childcare, gardening, food preservation, textile production, and often helping with farming too. For noble women, it meant supervising servants, managing household accounts, overseeing food storage and preparation, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. The medieval household wasn't just a home, but often a production center. Women brewed beer, made cheese, spun thread, wove cloth, sewed clothing, prepared medicines, preserved foods, and produced countless necessities. Their domestic labor was essential to survival, yet often taken for granted as simply what women were supposed to do. Manuals like The Goodman of Paris provided exhaustive instructions on household management, from removing stains to supervising servants to preparing elaborate meals. These weren't suggestions, but requirements for a woman who wanted to be considered virtuous. A disorderly house reflected poorly, not just on a woman's skills, but on her moral character. This domestic focus came with practical knowledge that was passed from mother to daughter. Medieval women knew which herbs could heal, which plants could dye cloth, how to deliver babies, how to brew medicines, and countless other skills. Their domestic expertise represented generations of practical wisdom, even as society reduced their identity to these roles. The expectation of domestic excellence created a double bind. Women were defined by their household work, yet rarely received recognition for it. Their labor was simultaneously essential and invisible, expected yet undervalued, a pattern that would continue long after the medieval period ended. Number 8. Perfect piety. What if your salvation and your family's depended on your religious devotion? Medieval women faced enormous pressure to demonstrate perfect religious piety, not just for themselves, but as spiritual guardians for their households. Women were expected to attend church regularly, know their prayers, observe all religious festivals and fasts, and model devout behavior. They were considered more naturally inclined towards spiritual matters than men, yet paradoxically were excluded from clerical roles and religious authority. A good medieval woman maintained a household altar, taught prayers to her children, observed religious fasts, gave to the poor, and kept religious holidays with appropriate devotion. Her piety was meant to be visible but not ostentatious, demonstrating genuine devotion rather than prideful display. Many women found meaning and purpose in religious devotion. Some joined convents, becoming nuns who devoted their lives to prayer, learning, and service. Others became anchoresses, choosing to be walled into small cells attached to churches to live lives of constant prayer and contemplation. The cult of the Virgin Mary shaped expectations of female piety. Mary represented an impossible ideal, a virgin mother, perfectly obedient, yet spiritually powerful. Women were encouraged to emulate her virtues, while being reminded they could never achieve her perfection. Religious devotion offered some women rare opportunities for education, authority, and independence. Abbesses ran large religious communities, managed substantial properties, and wielded significant influence. Mystics like Julian of Norwich and Marjorie Kempe claimed direct communication with God, giving their words special weight even in a society that preferred women silent. Yet even as piety offered some women paths to learning and influence, it reinforced restrictive gender roles for most. The same religious teachings that elevated Mary also emphasized Eve's sin and women's moral weakness. Women's religious practices were simultaneously encouraged and carefully controlled, ensuring their devotion didn't challenge male authority in church or home. Number 7. Patience in suffering. Could you endure pain and hardship without complaint? Medieval women were expected to bear suffering with patience and even gratitude, seeing it as their natural lot and an opportunity for spiritual growth. Women faced physical suffering throughout their lives. Childhood malnutrition, dangerous pregnancies, painful childbirths, without effective pain relief, domestic violence, and hard physical labor took tremendous tolls on women's bodies. Rather than addressing these hardships, medieval society glorified women who endured suffering silently. Religious teachings reinforced this expectation. Women heard sermons comparing their pain in childbirth to Christ's suffering on the cross. They were told their patience in hardship could reduce their time in purgatory and bring them closer to God. Pain wasn't just inevitable, it was presented as potentially beneficial to their souls. Stories of female saints almost invariably featured extreme suffering. Saint Agatha had her breasts cut off, Saint Lucy her eyes gouged out, Saint Margaret was swallowed by a dragon, yet all maintained their faith and patience through unimaginable torment. These weren't just pious tales, but models women were expected to emulate in their own hardships. Medical care for women's conditions was limited and often ineffective. Women turning to female healers or midwives for help risked accusations of witchcraft if their remedies seemed too effective. The expectation of patient suffering discouraged women from seeking relief for their ailments or protection from abuse. Patience in suffering extended beyond physical pain to endurance of difficult marriages, loss of children, a common occurrence in an era of high infant mortality, poverty, and injustice. A woman who complained too much or sought to change her circumstances might be viewed as unnatural and morally suspect. This glorification of female suffering served to deny and perpetuate systems that caused harm to women. By making patience a virtue, medieval society transformed women's very real pain into a moral test rather than a problem to be solved. Number 6. Maternal Devotion. What if you were defined almost entirely by your role as a mother or potential mother? Medieval society expected complete maternal devotion from women, seeing motherhood as their primary purpose and defining virtue. A good medieval mother was expected to nurture her children physically, morally, and spiritually. She was responsible for their early education, religious instruction, and moral development. Sons would eventually be placed in male-dominated environments for education or apprenticeship, but daughters remained under maternal supervision, learning the skills they would need as wives and mothers themselves. Despite the central importance of motherhood, childbirth in medieval times was extraordinarily dangerous. Without effective medical interventions, many women died giving birth. Those who survived often faced multiple pregnancies in quick succession, placing enormous strain on their bodies. Yet, refusing marital relations to avoid pregnancy was considered a sin, trapping women in cycles of dangerous childbearing. The emotional bond between mothers and children was recognized but subordinated to practical concerns. Among nobility, children might be sent away as young as 7 for education or to cement political alliances. Peasant children joined the workforce early, with their labor essential to family survival. The luxury of focused maternal attention was rare in a world where survival demanded constant labor from all family members. Women who couldn't have children faced stigma and sometimes suspicion. Infertility was almost always blamed on the woman, regardless of medical reality. Childless marriages might be annulled, and barren women could face accusations of witchcraft or divine punishment for secret sins. Medieval art and literature offered contradictory messages about motherhood. The Virgin Mary represented perfect, devoted motherhood, but Eve was blamed for bringing sin and suffering to humanity through her maternal failure. This duality reflected society's ambivalence. Motherhood was both glorified and feared, essential yet potentially dangerous. Women often found strength and purpose in their maternal roles, despite the challenges. Records show mothers fighting for their children's interests, arranging advantageous marriages, protecting inheritances, and using whatever influence they had to secure their children's futures in an often harsh world. Number 5. Self-sacrificing service. Have you ever felt like your needs always come last? Medieval women were expected to put everyone else's needs before their own as a fundamental moral virtue, serving their families, communities, and faith with selfless dedication. The ideal medieval woman ate last after serving others. She took the smallest portion, wore the simplest clothes, and sacrificed her comfort for her family's benefit. Her time was never truly her own, as her duty was always to serve others' needs rather than pursue her own interests or rest. Service wasn't limited to family. Women were expected to care for the sick, comfort the dying, feed the hungry, and assist neighbors in need. While men might provide financial charity, women offered direct service, washing, feeding, nursing, and comforting those in need. This community care was considered a natural extension of their nurturing role. Religious teachings reinforced these expectations. Women heard sermons about the virtue of Martha, who served Jesus tirelessly, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, who called herself the handmaid of the Lord. Service wasn't just good behavior. It was presented as the path to spiritual salvation for women. For noble women, service took the form of hospitality, managing elaborate households that might host dozens or even hundreds of guests, ensuring everyone was properly fed, housed, and entertained according to their status. Their service was more visible and came with more authority, but was no less demanding. Self-sacrifice extended to a woman's possessions. A good wife might give away her own food during famines, sell her jewelry to pay family debts, or work herself to exhaustion to provide for her family. Her willingness to sacrifice was seen as proof of her virtue and love. This expectation of self-sacrifice created physical and emotional burdens that shortened women's lives. Medieval women often suffered from malnutrition, exhaustion, and untreated health conditions as they prioritized everyone else's well-being over their own. Yet a woman who prioritized her own needs risked being labeled selfish, one of the worst accusations that could be made against a medieval woman. Number 4. Absolute loyalty. Could you remain loyal even when it wasn't deserved? Medieval women were expected to show unwavering loyalty to their husbands, families, and lords, standing by them regardless of how they were treated in return. A loyal medieval wife never criticized her husband publicly, defended him against criticism, and supported his decisions even when they seemed unwise. She kept family secrets, preserved family honor, and maintained a unified front against the outside world. Her loyalty was expected to transcend her own self-interest, comfort, and sometimes even her own safety. Disloyalty was asymmetrical. While women were expected to remain loyal no matter what, men's loyalty to their wives was more conditional. A wife who failed in her duties, particularly sexual fidelity, could be discarded, but a woman was expected to remain loyal even to a cruel or unfaithful husband. Stories that reinforced this expectation circulated widely. Patient Griselda, a character from Boccaccio's Decameron and Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, endured terrible tests of her loyalty, including her husband taking away her children and pretending to replace her with a younger wife. Her unwavering loyalty, despite this cruelty, was presented as admirable rather than troubling. For noble women, loyalty often extended beyond the family to political allegiances. Women caught between conflicting loyalties during wars or political conflicts faced impossible situations. They might be expected to remain loyal to a husband fighting against their birth family, or to maintain loyalty to multiple parties with competing interests. Some women use the expectation of loyalty to their advantage, acting as mediators between feuding factions or negotiating peace between family members. Their presumed loyalty to all parties made them effective diplomats in certain situations, giving them rare political influence. Despite the one-sided nature of this expectation, many medieval women expressed deep loyalty to their families and communities. Letters, wills, and court records show women fighting fiercely to protect family interests, preserve inheritances for children, and maintain family connections across generations, demonstrating that their loyalty, while expected, was often also genuine. Number 3. Humility and gentleness. What happens when displaying confidence is considered a moral failing? Medieval women were expected to cultivate humility and gentleness as core virtues, avoiding any behavior that might seem proud, assertive, or aggressive. A humble medieval woman downplayed her accomplishments, attributed her successes to others, spoke modestly about herself, and never sought attention or praise. She was expected to be self-effacing in all areas of life, from her appearance to her words to her actions. The virtue of gentleness manifested in soft speech, delicate movements, and tender care for others. A gentle woman avoided harsh words, sudden movements, or strong emotions. She moved through the world with quiet grace rather than bold assertion. These expectations varied by social class, but applied across society. Noble women demonstrated humble gentleness through refined manners, quiet speech, and gracious hospitality, while peasant women showed it through patient endurance and unassuming service. Both were judged on how well they embodied these qualities. The pressure to appear humble created practical challenges. Women with genuine talents or intelligence had to carefully balance showing enough skill to be useful without appearing too confident or capable. Female healers, artists, and businesswomen had to frame their work as service rather than ambition to avoid criticism. Behavior manuals offered detailed instructions on cultivating the appearance of humility. Women were taught to keep their eyes lowered in public, to walk with small steps, to avoid laughing loudly, and to use self-deprecating language. These weren't just suggestions for polite behavior, but moral imperatives. Yet medieval records reveal women who managed to exercise authority while maintaining the appearance of humility. Abbesses ran major religious institutions. Noblewomen managed vast estates, and merchant widows operated successful businesses, all while carefully framing their actions in terms of duty and service rather than personal ambition. Number 2, prudence and wisdom. Did you know medieval women needed to be both perfectly obedient and incredibly wise? This paradoxical expectation required women to demonstrate prudence and wisdom within strictly defined boundaries. A prudent medieval woman managed household resources carefully, anticipated problems before they arose, and made wise decisions about matters under her authority. She needed practical wisdom to run a household, treat illnesses, preserve food for winter, and navigate complex family relationships. Women were expected to offer counsel to their husbands and families, but in carefully prescribed ways. The ideal was to influence through gentle suggestion rather than direct instruction, to advise without appearing to teach, and to guide without seeming to lead. This wisdom was expected to remain within appropriate female domains. A woman who displayed too much knowledge of politics, theology, or other male-dominated fields risked criticism. Her wisdom needed to serve practical ends and family interests rather than intellectual curiosity or personal advancement. Medical knowledge represented an important area of female wisdom. Women were expected to know which herbs could heal common ailments, how to care for the sick, how to assist in childbirth, and how to prepare medicinal remedies. This knowledge was passed from mother to daughter, or between women in communities. Prudence extended to social interactions. Women needed to know exactly how to behave with people of different social ranks, when to speak and when to remain silent, and how to navigate complex social hierarchies without causing offense. A misstep could damage family reputation or create dangerous enemies. The emphasis on wisdom created a tension with expectations of obedience. Women were supposed to be intelligent enough to manage complex households, but compliant enough to defer to male authority. They needed wisdom to guide their families, but were expected to appear humble and subordinate while doing so. Number 1, beauty and good appearance. Ever felt judged on your looks more than your character? Medieval women faced intense scrutiny over their appearance, with beauty considered not just an aesthetic preference, but a reflection of moral virtue. The ideal medieval beauty looked nothing like today's standards. Pale skin, high forehead, small pink lips, blonde hair, and a slender figure with small breasts but wide hips, suggesting fertility, represented the ideal. Women went to extraordinary lengths to achieve these standards, using dangerous lead-based cosmetics, pucking hairlines to create higher foreheads, and tight lacing to shape their bodies. Beauty wasn't just about attracting a husband. It was considered a visual representation of inner virtue. Physical appearance was thought to reveal moral character, with beauty indicating goodness and physical flaws suggesting moral failings. This created a double burden for women, who were judged on both their moral behavior and how well they conformed to beauty standards. Even as women were pressured to be beautiful, they faced criticism for focusing too much on appearance. Religious authorities warned against vanity and excessive attention to adornment, Women had to navigate the impossible expectation of being naturally beautiful without appearing to work at it or take pride in their looks. Clothing and appearance indicated social status, with strict sumptuary laws in many regions dictating exactly what materials, colors, and styles different classes could wear. Women who dressed above their station faced legal penalties as well as social disapproval. This meant appearance wasn't just about beauty, but about correctly displaying one's exact position in the social hierarchy. Despite these pressures, personal accounts and literature from the period show that medieval women, like women in every era, had complex relationships with beauty standards, sometimes conforming, sometimes resisting, and often adapting expectations to their own purposes. Their efforts to manage appearance within medieval constraints required considerable knowledge and skill. Women created cosmetics from natural ingredients, fashioned complex hairstyles, and developed techniques for textile production and clothing construction that represented significant technical achievements, even as society reduced these efforts to vanity. Have you ever stopped to wonder how these ancient expectations might still shape our world today? Do you see echoes of these medieval moral demands in modern expectations of women?